Hello, everyone. It's Professor Streeter. Hope you're doing well. I miss sharing class time with you. I miss seeing you in the classroom. This is a strange time for all of us. I thought I'd start making some videos to bring back a sense of normalcy or to come close to that. Um, and I'm going to begin this week by talking about chapter 13 and 14 in Shafer-Landau and social contract theory, the prisoner's dilemma, and how the prisoner's dilemma gives rise to the social contract. So that's where I'm going to start. And let me show you what I've got here. I'm going to split the screen up, very high tech. So over on this side, we're going to have some notes that I'm going to talk about. And really, I'm just going to talk through some things that Shafer-Landau does in chapter 13 and 14. I hope this helps. Over on the other side, we've got me. I will make these notes available so you can read them on your own. You can read them while you're watching this video or read them on your own time. Okay, so let's get started. Prisoner's dilemmas. What are they? And so here I'm going to start with a quote from page 198 in the Fundamentals of Ethics. Prisoner's dilemmas are situations in which the rational pursuit of self-interest will lead people to refuse to cooperate with each other, even though this leaves everyone much worse off. So I asked you to think last week about whether the situation we're in now is a kind of prisoner's dilemma, or whether we find ourselves in something like a prisoner's dilemma right now. For example, with people going to the grocery store, right? Normally we go to the grocery store, we can rely on each other not to hoard or not to buy up all of a certain kind of good. And so when I go shopping, I don't have any reason to buy up all the toilet paper because I can rely on everyone to just buy what they need. But in a time of panic, maybe I can't rely on that so much anymore. And if I go to the store trusting that you won't buy too much for yourself, well, maybe I'll find myself at the store and there's no more toilet paper. So maybe I better buy some right now to protect myself. And if everyone reasons that way, then very quickly there's no more toilet paper in the store and everyone is much worse off. Okay, so do we find ourselves in something like a prisoner's dilemma right now? Yeah, maybe, maybe not. There certainly are other kinds of cases where it's clear, like the fishermen in the Chesapeake Bay that Shafer-Landau describes, where certainly it would be in all the fishermen's interest to have a steady stock of cod, but if I can trust that my fellow fishermen don't fish up all the cod, then I have a reason to only take in a certain number each week. But what if I can't trust my fellow fishermen? What if the other fishermen go and fish up all the cod? Well, then I'll get out there and there'll be none left for me. So I'm going to fish up more than I really need or more than I think I can sell. And over time, there won't be any more cod left for anyone to fish, and all the fishermen are worse off. Okay, so let's take the fishermen, competitors for the sale of cod. Why don't they cooperate with each other? If they all cooperated with each other, they'd all be better off. Well, it seems too risky is the thought. And it's too risky. It involves trusting each other. And if I trust you too much, you can take advantage of me. So I'm at least going to protect myself from being taken advantage of by you. And then we all end up overfishing the cod. And we all end up without a livelihood anymore. So the question then becomes, well, what do we need to escape from prisoners' dilemmas? If the competitors see cooperation as too risky. Well, for one thing, we need beneficial rules that require cooperation and punish betrayal. So we can imagine the state imposing sanctions on fishermen who fish too many cod and instituting rules for how many cod you could fish in a given week. In this case of this toilet paper, I suppose we could imagine the store imposing rules for how much toilet paper you could buy and charging you extra if you wanted to buy more. Okay. There also has to be an enforcer who can ensure that these rules are obeyed. And that's the kind of key for Hobbes. That's why we need a strong state, or he thinks an absolute monarch. And you can think of this in terms of, how people talk about what's going on in China right now. One of the reasons that they've been able to get people to follow the rules of social isolation and social distancing and quarantining is because they have such a strong state, right? Okay. But these are the terms of the social contract, essentially. That in order to escape the prisoner's dilemma, we need beneficial rules that require cooperation and punish betrayal, and we need an enforcer who can ensure that these rules are obeyed. What is the social contract? An implicit or explicit agreement to give up the free rein of self-interest, or the liberty to pursue one's own good without limitation or constraint, in exchange for something, in exchange for the advantages of cooperation, for example, publicly shared goods, stability, protection from external threats, right? The state provides us with protection. It provides us with public goods like libraries, okay? And stability and harmony and peace. All of these are the benefits of cooperation, and in exchange for those benefits, we have to give up some of our liberty. We have to sacrifice some of our self-interest. Okay. So we can use this idea, the idea of the social contract, to explain and justify both the origin and the basis of our standards for right action, of our moral standards. Right? This is the idea behind social contract theory. We begin with this idea, with the problem of the prisoner's dilemma, and the solution to the prisoner's dilemma kind of gives us the basis for our moral standards. We'll talk about that. But like utilitarianism and like Kantianism, then contractarianism is a proceduralist ethics, as Shafer-Landau points out. Instead of starting by making assumptions at the outset about which actions are right or wrong, okay, lying, cheating is wrong, right? Instead of starting with an assumption that those things are wrong, the proceduralist starts with a procedure that tells us how to distinguish right from wrong. Okay? And in this way, we can justify our views about right action by showing that they emerge from the correct procedure. Instead of making some assumptions, we begin with a procedure and we explain which actions are right in terms of showing that these views of right action come out of the correct procedure. Okay. So what is the procedure for the contractarian? The procedure takes the form of a real or a hypothetical contract. So in essence, we should adopt the moral views that are agreed to or agreed upon by the contractors, by the people who enter into the contract. That's the essence of the view, right? What is morally correct is whatever the contractors agree to. All right. So this gives us a standard of right action from the contractarian's point of view, right? An action is right just in case it is allowed by the terms of the social contract. Recall the utilitarian also has a standard. An action is right just in case it promotes the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Or for the Kantian, an action is right just in case it is in accordance with a maxim that can be universalized. Okay, so quoting Shafer-Landau, another way of putting this, an action is right for the contractarian just in case it is permitted by rules that free and equal and rational people would agree to live by, on the condition that others obey these rules as well. That's from page 195 and 196. Okay, so that's a view about right action. We sort of start with the prisoner's dilemma and we think about, like, what do we need to get out of the prisoner's dilemma, right? To give ourselves reason to cooperate with each other. And this gives rise to the idea of a social contract, which itself sets the standards of right action, right? The right thing to do is whatever is permitted by the contract. Why should we enter into the contract? Because the alternative is living with prisoner's dilemmas. The alternative is going to the market and there's no toilet paper. We don't want that. All right. So what are some advantages of this view? And this is going to page 200 and 206 in chapter 13. Well, one thing to say is it captures the sense in which morality is a social phenomenon. Right? Morality has to do with our relationships with other people in society, and we have responsibilities to each other in society. If we imagine a life of isolation in which we don't live among other people, we don't have a society, then we don't have any moral obligations. For example, we don't have moral obligations to ourselves, and we don't have them to God, right? I guess is one thing to say. The contractarian doesn't have the view that our moral obligations are rooted in a relationship to God or to ourselves. Our moral obligations are rooted in our relationship to other people. in society. Okay. It also offers a procedure, right, for justifying every moral rule. Do the thing, right, that that is permitted under the terms of the contract. Okay, or adopt the policy or adopt the course of action that that could be agreed upon by the contractors. I said there's a kind of procedure that gives us a clear way of determining whether we should accept a moral rule or not. Right? It gives us a way of justifying every moral rule that we put in place or that we propose. It's one that the contractors would agree to. It also explains the objectivity of morality. Right? Morality is not just a matter of opinion. Right? It's based on a conception of what rational contractors would agree to, right? And so any given society could have rules that don't accord with the standards that the rational contractors would agree to. And so we would have a way of criticizing that society. But it explains the objectivity of morality without referring to God. What makes moral rules objective is the agreement of the contractors, right? Not the attitude of God or the command of God. It also explains and justifies the content of basic moral rules. And this is a place where Shafer-Landau references John Rawls and the veil of ignorance, or what John Rawls calls the original position. John Rawls is a philosopher, a 20th century philosopher who developed this view about justice. But he thought the sort of starting point for thinking about justice was imagining people who didn't know anything about who they were or their place in society. They didn't know if their gender or their race or their class, or they didn't know anything about themselves. And so if we all enter into a kind of a conversation about how to set the rules to live by in society, and we don't know about who we are, then we would choose rules that benefit everybody. Since I don't know if I'm going to end up in being rich or poor, right, or in a discriminated group or a non-discriminated group, right, I would choose rules that don't discriminate against anyone, right, since I don't know who I am. So from behind a veil of ignorance, right, I would choose. So the thought is like that's how we understand what the moral rules are. The moral rules are the ones that rational people would choose, not knowing anything about themselves, right, from what he calls the original position. And he thinks that they would choose two basic principles of justice. One, that we should extend basic rights to everyone, and two, that we should permit inequalities in society only if they benefit the least advantaged members of society. So that's a kind of egalitarian approach to morality that Rawls defends, but he defends it from this kind of position of the contract, this idea of the hypothetical contract between rational people who don't know where they're going to end up in society. So they would choose rules or principles that would benefit everyone, no matter where they end up in society. Okay? And from, at least this is an advantage of the contractarian point of view, because it gives us a way of justifying our basic intuitions about what kinds of rules are morally permissible and what kinds of rules are not morally permissible. Okay. And so then he goes through lots of other reasons for thinking that contractarianism is a kind of plausible view. For example, it gives a way of explaining why sometimes it's okay to break the moral rules. Right? When you can't rely on others to cooperate, there's no point in making sacrifices because the benefits of cooperation are gone. So in the absence of the benefits of cooperation, I have no reason to cooperate. And so sometimes I get to break the moral rules. In very extreme cases, right, when sort of society breaks down. It also, however, justifies a basic moral duty to obey the law, right? The social contract theory can explain that, right? Because the obedience to the law supports the basic institutions that make the benefits of the social contract possible, right? So the way in which we benefit from the social contract depends on basic institutions being in place. And those basic institutions depend on people obeying the law. So why should we obey the law? Because in the absence of the basic institutions. We can't enjoy